Good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you may be joining us from. I can see that today we have representation from not just here in Kenya, but going by the registrations, I can see we have our friends from Uganda. I can see we have some people from Rwanda. Good afternoon and welcome to today's ADR talk. It is fashioned in the way of a sensitization symposium hosted by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and partnered with our friends from the Kenya National Highways Authority. I'm your host, Evelyn Kimani. I'm the acting CEO of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, and it is very good to see the numbers growing. I think right now we are at 72. And today's session looks at building a culture of ADR, empowering engineers to resolve conflicts effectively. Now, I hope I can be heard clearly. Engineer Cherono, just to confirm before I proceed.
Good afternoon, Evelyn.
Perfect. All right. So we have in store for you a very engaging conversation where we have targeted specifically engineers, and through this partnership, we've had a long-standing partnership with KENHA. And allow me to confirm at this particular point that during the 5th ADR award ceremony that were hosted last year by the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, KENHA were elected or voted the most impactful partners in promotion of dispute resolution and especially infrastructure dispute resolution through ADR. So we are in very, very good hands, and it is for this reason, or at least from that background, that we saw it fit to host this particular webinar targeted at people within the built environment and the engineering sector, to see what is it that the professional within this area needs to know in terms of not only just managing disputes and conflicts, but also avoidance, as well as even the resolution of it. As the Institute, we are keen to promote arbitration and ADR because we've seen the impact it has in not only just the different complex projects that are involved within the built environment, but also in terms of the impact it has on the economy. Mine is just to highlight and to invite our very able panel. Today we are joined by a stellar panel who will be moderated by our very own director, Senator Sylvia Kasanga, Senator Architect Dr. Sylvia Kasanga. Senator, I hope I've done justice to that introduction, whose bio I'm going to read very shortly. We are also joined in by two panelists, one engineer Daniel Cherono, as well as one of our directors and a construction dispute lawyer, David Kaggwa. Allow me, I know they will be introduced by the moderator, but allow me the pleasure of introducing the moderator, who is, as I mentioned, Dr. Architect Sylvia Kasanga. She's an international dispute resolution practitioner, an arbitrator, and built environment professional for over 23 years of cross-disciplinary experience spanning arbitration, construction, public policy, and governance. She holds a Master's of Law in International Dispute Resolution from Queen Mary University of London, as well as a Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Dr. Kasanga is a court member of the ICC Court of Arbitration in Paris, where she represents Kenya. She's also a director of ICC Kenya. She's a director here at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. She's an arbitrator, a trainer with NCIA, and she also serves on the Executive Committee of Women in ADR. Her arbitral practice focuses on construction, infrastructure, and complex commercial disputes, including high-value matters involving government entities, development projects, and multilateral funded contracts. She has served as sole arbitrator, party-appointed arbitrator, as well as a member of a DAB in disputes exceeding over 2.5 billion shillings. In parallel, she is the founder and managing director of SICAM Solutions LLP, an architectural and construction management firm, bringing strong technical insights to construction arbitration. She previously served as a senator in the Parliament of Kenya between 2017 and 2022, and sponsored the ADR bill, reflecting her deep engagement with ADR policy and reform across Africa. So today we not only have a policymaker, we also have a stellar dispute resolver, especially in the field of construction. And we are in safe hands. And I know that she will moderate these sessions throughout. I know we have about 2 hours and we'll be in very, very safe hands. Allow me to also recognize that we're joined as well by the chairman of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, Professor Kenneth Wayne Mutuma. Prof, I'm not so sure whether you're able to say something at this point or maybe at the closing, but just wanted to highlight that he has joined us. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I can just make a few comments and then hand over back to you. I think I just wanted to underline the quality of the panelists that are speaking and the moderator that will be taking us through this topic. If you allow me to say, of course, Senator Sylvia Kasanga, not just being a member of our board, but very instrumental when it comes to ADR policy. In the past couple of years, including giving us some very rich insights on the present bills and where, for want of maybe better words, more could be done to accommodate the built environment. But beyond that, I think Senator Sylvia Kasanga is doing a fantastic job by bringing the next crop of built environment professionals on board. I hope she'll have a chance to speak about that because it's going to be a course specifically targeting young architects. And we are trying to grow up on numbers specifically for that section as a built construction dispute resolvers. So thank you very much to Senator Sylvia Kasanga. I was also going to mention that Engineer David Cherono is very, very key. Daniel Cherono is very, very key on the work that we're doing with engineers. Many of you will recall that we had a symposium webinar last year, and there are a lot of dispute adjudication board matters that have become very paramount in the world of finance, and specifically with the World Bank and the aligned FIDIC contracts. Engineer Cherono has been at the center of how we can make sure that much of that work is not frustrated by the low levels of capacity in our ecosystem. And then just to beef up what the CEO was saying earlier on, I think our very good friend and chair, not just a member of our board, but a chair of our Uganda chapter. For those of you who went to Uganda, I think even when we describe it as a chapter, you'll find there's a anomaly. We had a very, very big conference towards the end of last year with a hierarchy of very senior officials from the judiciary, from across Africa, senior engineers and so forth. Behind all of that is the chairperson, David Kaggwa, and I think he's a very powerful name in the circles of the built environment in Africa and many disputes that are being resolved. I'm hoping, Chairman, we will meet shortly in Lusaka. I think there's a big thing happening towards the end of this month. So I'm really looking forward to catching up. More than that, the topic, I think, is what is key. It's a sensitization symposium, but more important, it revolved around culture. So the built environment has their primary objectives. In many cases, relating to a project, the manner it's designed, manner it's the contract is put in place, the manner it's executed until finality. What, of course, is of major concern is when various other detours and diversions become more important than the overall objectives, which is the delivery of a project. And one of those detours is the dispute resolution of that specific contract. And that's where, when we talk about an ADR culture, history speaks very kindly about the built environment and the fact that they were at the center of that ecosystem from the past. However, like many other things, I think there is always the danger of what you call lawyering and legalese when we think about dispute resolution, and the system then reverting to a default that it was trying to escape from in the language of the courts and the formalities, the procedural formalities and technicalities that are inherent in the formal justice system. So the idea behind this symposium, as you imagine, culture speaks to practices, behaviors, attitudes, is to empower people that are a critical part of that conveyor belt back into the center so that the disputes are resolved effectively and, if I may add, efficiently. So I just wanted to make those words, preliminary remarks. I think they're important because they enable you to know who is before the panel and the richness that they bring. I also do note that there are many, many other persons that are present of great esteem. I can see Engineer Dr. De Souza. I think if he tells you when he got his PhD, many of us were either very young or not on the planet, just to name a few of our seniors that are present. And I'm sure they will add to the discourse in this conversation. So thank you very, very much, CEO. I can also see the president of ASEC here with us, a very good friend of ours, Engineer Jane Mutulili. Thank you very much for joining. It's such a great pleasure to have you. QS, Lillian Kisinji, wonderful to see you. Sheila Onyango, someone who does a lot of work in this area. I cannot exhaust the entire list, but mine is to say our deepest sense of gratitude and that you could take the time to be with us for this webinar. So without much further ado, let me hand over back to the CEO. I also look forward to hearing the rich conversation that's going to come by. CEO, thank you again for always putting a great discussion. I think you can see with the numbers and the seniority, it is spot on target, and all of us are looking forward to the interaction. I believe it's not one way. Somehow it will open up. The moderator will guide us accordingly. Back again to you, Evelyn.
Thank you very much, Chair, for those opening remarks and setting the stage for us. Without further ado, allow me to hand it to the moderator so that then we can get into the substantive aspects of these discussions. Just a few housekeeping highlights. If you have any questions during the discussions, put it on the chat. Any comments, and then now we'll have the moderator guide us to the rest of the aspects. Karibuni.
Thank you so much. Madam CEO, can you confirm that you can hear me loud and clear?
Yes,
Engineer, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Once again, good afternoon, colleagues, engineers, practitioners, distinguished guests, and everyone here today. And once again, on behalf of FCIArb Kenya and the Kenya National Highways Authority, KENHA, I warmly welcome you to this timely webinar. And actually, we've called it a Sensitization Symposium on Building Culture of ADR, and that is empowering engineers to resolve conflicts effectively. Now, there's no question that infrastructure projects always sit at the heart of national development. And this is, so far across anywhere in the world, but specifically in Africa today, where the focus is on Africa and infrastructure development. But let's also understand that they're the most complex undertakings that we actually engage in. And they involve very intricate contracts. They involve multiple stakeholders. They involve technical uncertainties and high financial stakes. And as a result, conflict is not an exception at all. It is often a part and parcel of the project cycle. And traditionally, we all know that a lot of these conflicts find their way into litigation. And this has a great cost to the project, the timelines, the budgets, relationships, and ultimately public interest, because they're funded by the public. The public interest, of course, becomes of critical essence. And today, because it's a sensitization symposium, we want to tweak it a little bit so that we begin to look at our mindsets. We want to change these mindsets. We want to adopt a different mindset, especially for engineers and those consultants who are practically within that space. How engineers and project institutions can prevent disputes, manage them early, and resolve them efficiently through ADR. Now, ADR here is not trying to run away from accountability, but actually we want to preserve value, protect relationships, and keep projects moving. That is the essence of ADR. So here today, we want to equip the engineers with skills and confidence to handle conflict as part of their professional practice, as part of their professional expertise. So therefore, this webinar is designed to be practical in design. So you will hear from our very able panelists. And by the end of the session, we expect you participants to understand why ADR matters, how to apply it in your daily operations, and what concrete steps can therefore be taken to embed ADR into your contracts, project workflows, organizational culture, and particularly, of course, in the infrastructure sector. That's why we have Ken Hart today here, very well represented. And therefore, we have two panelists. You can see them there on your screens. We have Engineer Cherono, and we have Mr. David Kaggwa. And because they have given us their time, you will allow me to tell you who they are. It's good that you should know who they are and how accomplished they are. And I'll start with Mr. Kaggwa. He's an international arbitrator, a FIDIC certified trainer, an adjudicator, construction lawyer with over 20 years experience, representing clients and acting as a neutral in resolving complex disputes involving major commercial infrastructure, power, and construction projects. You heard that he's the chairman of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Uganda chapter, and he's a director here in the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Kenya. He's the founder and executive director of Construction Law Institute, which is a think tank that unites professionals in the built environment. He's a senior partner at Kaggwa Advocates and a specialist law firm, which is a specialist law firm in construction and energy law practice. And he's a visiting trainer of construction law in the University of Botswana and Law Development Center. So he holds a Master of Laws degree, Construction Law and Arbitration from Robert Gordon University, and is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, a fellow in the Institute of Construction Claims Practitioners, and a fellow in the Construction Law Institute, a member of London Court of International Arbitration, and a member of Dispute Resolution Board Foundation USA, and a member of the Society of Construction Law in the UK. Please welcome Mr. David Kaggwa. You can give him a few flowers because you can hear how accomplished he is. Thank you very much. And our second panelist is Engineer David Cherono, who is a distinguished civil engineer, arbitrator, adjudicator, and mediator. He has extensive knowledge in the construction industry, having successfully delivered large-scale highway projects while serving primarily in the public sector in a career spanning over 20 years. I honestly can't wait to hear some of the live case examples he will give us. He's adept in engineering and construction field, covering all aspects of project cycle, including initiating, planning, design, documenting, procurement, financing, supervision, and maintenance. And he has been involved in management of claims, arbitration, adjudication in construction disputes. He has attended webinars, workshops, conferences, domestic, international, where he has shared his extensive knowledge and experience as a speaker. He's registered with the Engineers Board of Kenya and is a fellow of the Institute of Engineers of Kenya. He's a fellow at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and a member of the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering and Masters of Law in Construction Law, Arbitration, and Adjudication. Please give him his flowers and his accolades for being so accomplished. So today you can see we are in very able hands, and you have heard from our CEO. Let's keep mute. Let's keep mute so that we can move fast. Please post your comments as we continue the conversation, because it's going to be an engaging conversation. Would love your comments to be on the chat and as we continue, so that we can make reference to them. And of course, we will have a question and answer session. So keep yourself mute until at the point when I shall unmute you. If you have some energy, post in the group so that we can know where you are joining us from. Because I've heard we have panelists from across borders. Do text us there on the group chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. Otherwise, welcome everybody, and let us get right into it. Our first segment of this conversation, we shall be just setting the context. Our panelists will be setting the context for us and telling us why ADR actually matters in infrastructure projects. And I'll start with you, Mr. Kaggwa. Now, for the benefit of our participants and in a sort of overall global way, please do explain to us why, define ADR and explain to us why it is particularly important in the infrastructure industry players, that is the engineers and everyone else who is working within that space, so that we can understand and adopt it as part of professional experience. Welcome, Mr. Kaggwa.
Thank you, Dr. Architect Kasanga. And to our listeners, thank you very much for tuning in. Straight to the point, ADR is an acronym, which is actually a misnomer. The acronym is Alternative Dispute Resolution. I call it a misnomer because in construction, ADR is the go-to method of dispute resolution. And I belong to the school of thought that ADR should be renamed Appropriate Dispute Resolution. So it's basically a method in which disputes are resolved without going through the court system. So there are various methods that are employed, and they are most effective, based on what I have seen, through the infrastructure cycle. And these methods play a very big role in maintaining cash flow, maintaining relations, and making sure that the projects stay on course. So in brief, architect, that's all I can say about ADR.
I think I'll leave myself unmuted. And if I'm not wrong, there's something slightly with your connection. Or is it me who's not hearing him very clearly? Maybe just check. And as you're checking that, maybe you can just highlight, like a brief highlight of what are these ADR sort of mechanisms, just in a very nutshell, because we shall get deeper into them. But give us a snapshot.
The snapshot, and in regard to infrastructure disputes, the commonest that are applicable are negotiation, which is most widely used and most effective. And then there is mediation. And then there is adjudication. Then there is arbitration. But most critically, you realize that for the relevance of the engineers, all the members of the built environment, they play a role in almost all the areas. They play the role of negotiators during the certification process or when there are measurements before certificates are issued. They play the role of decision makers when they're making determination at the level of the engineer's determination. They play the role of mediators during the period of amicable settlement before the matter is had at arbitration. And obviously they play roles of being dispute board members and also as arbitrators.
So Mr. Kaggwa, you can actually say that engineers, whether they know it or they don't know it, they're actually employing ADR mechanisms somehow, but they might not be, fully attested or attuned to the fact that they are actually ADR practitioners within their projects as they practice. And because we are trying to change this mindset of theirs so that they can now position ADR, maybe you can just give a comment around just what I have said.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. During the process of certification, for example, where the project manager is on site with the quantity surveyor trying to make measurements to determine how much is due to the contractor, a lot of negotiation skills are applied to make sure that there are no disputes at all. So from day one, engineers are playing ADR roles. They just need to be aware that they're ADR practitioners such that they upskill themselves.
All right, thank you so much. Let me bring in engineer Cherono. Engineer, from your experience, you're very experienced in delivering large public infrastructure projects. Why are such projects prone to conflict, and what kind of disputes arise most frequently? And what is the impact of those disputes on timelines, budgets, or in any other sense? Karibu, engineer.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moderator, and a very warm welcome to our audience. I'm happy I'm speaking to experts in the construction space. And if you're working in the construction space, I'm sure you've dealt or you've seen projects with complex scope. You've seen projects where you have diverse stakeholders from diverse backgrounds. You're also involved in projects in very diverse environments. Some areas are very wet, some areas are very dry. Some areas you are struggling to get material to carry out your construction works. You have unpredictable geotechnical and subsurface conditions within your contracts. You have a lot of external pressures from the politicians and from the different stakeholders as to how the projects are implemented. And also you have legal minefields. There are also compliance issues. There are issues safety. There are issues environment that the different players must be able to comply with as they implement their projects. The point I'm trying to drive is there will be every construction contract that we have will always experience a dispute in one way or the other. Perhaps you are not consciously dealing with a dispute, but in the real sense, every project is actually a seedbed, and it will precipitate some form of a dispute or the other. I think what engineers are mainly familiar with are claims. But disputes are not born at the end. They start right from when you are preparing a project. So when you have a project with a usually large scope, which are complex in nature, and you are involved with many parties, you are dealing with the public, you are dealing with the subsurface and geotechnical conditions, you are dealing with the weather and all this, then you are likely going to encounter a dispute. And this is really the nature of our infrastructure and construction projects that we do have. So they are prone to disputes because of the complexities that are prevailing during the implementation of those projects. Now, the big problem now is because of this situation, the different players, the parties, including the engineers whom you represent or whom we represent in the environment, do not find ways in good time to actively and effectively and economically try to resolve these issues as they arise. So the issues that come up start to snowball into very complex issues, which eventually, because of the way they are dealt with, and because there is no that culture of trying to resolve the disputes in good time, then they eventually snowball into a very big issue that eventually becomes a dispute. And I know later on we'll discuss some of these issues which have ended up in litigation, because if you want to pick the best measure of how these disputes can actually become in the end, sometimes it might be good to refer to what has ended up in litigation so that you understand the different missteps which were taken at the onset. I must say that engineers in this context, I don't want to speak about consultants only. Engineers work for employers, engineers work for contractors, engineers work for consultants, and they are the ones supervising the works. And I hope when we have this conversation, we are bringing all of them on board so that the different roles can be cut out, so that every one of the engineers will have a role in doing it. Now, the other issue that also precipitates this are the attitudes of the parties towards implementation of the contracts. If, for example, you are a site agent and you are not in very good terms with your resident engineer, then these issues that could have been nipped in the bud as they develop will eventually grow into very big disputes that are difficult to resolve. At the same time, let us all remember that most disputes belong to the parties. And so long as the parties are not communicating and there is no, proper channels for them to resolve these issues, then they eventually precipitate into disputes. So construction projects, since we've all agreed that they are complex in nature, actually require a plan or a management plan to deal with these issues from the onset. So, in a nutshell, these conflicts, these disputes in construction contracts will always arise because of the nature of the projects. But what is very critical is how do we make sure that we are able to resolve these issues as they arise. So I would want to leave it there, then we can explore it as we move on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Something you've just mentioned that triggered my thinking. My mom always says that things don't go wrong, things start wrong. Actually, you have pointed out to the fact that things actually do go wrong from a very early stage. Maybe you can give us just a bit of a snapshot on what are like early signs. What are some early signs that you can see a red flag and say, okay, there's a dispute approaching or something like that. Maybe give us an idea of a practical idea of what that looks like.
Very well. I will give an example, for example, of a poorly designed contract. We all put together our contract documents as engineers. And when you don't read as a document from end to end and pick out the conflicts that arise, all these issues eventually culminate into a dispute. A contract should actually set out the basics of what work needs to be done from the onset. It also needs to assign the different risks to the different parties and who is going to do what during the implementation. You must set out payment terms because as you narrow down on the disputes arise because of only two issues. That one party feels they are not properly compensated, or the other party feels that they don't have adequate and sufficient time to be able to implement the project. So it's a time and a money issue at the beginning. Now, if we also don't set out clearly as we prepare for these projects on how disagreements will be resolved, and especially where the inconsistencies in the documentation, then these disputes will always arise. Now, just to narrow down on your question of what are the telltale signs of a dispute? If you document it and document it more than once without coming up with a solution, then that next letter is a basis of your dispute. Because when a dispute usually occurs, the first point is maybe raise a notice by saying the contractor to the other party, or in the case of an employer's claim, then the employer would raise that to the engineer. So once the engineer has it, and if you are unable to call the parties to discuss and agree, then that is really the genesis, or that is a good sign of telling you that this is going to culminate eventually to a dispute.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, engineer, for that. And before I let you go, you did mention that a couple of the challenges that you find once a project is starting, from the geography of the place, the geotechnical aspects, the fact that you're dealing with multiple players. But you did speak of political interests. And I'm just wondering, in a very quick snapshot, of course, from the policy hat that I wear, how do you deal with political risk? Because I'm sure with your vast experience, you have come across this political risk. Maybe you can just tell us a little bit the challenge around that, because it's something I think we experience across Africa.
The dealing with political risk is a minefield, and I will not prescribe one specific solution to deal with it. But I would want to say that the remedy to dealing with political risk is communication and proactiveness of the different experts who are dealing with these infrastructure projects. I would want to give an example, say, of a construction project of a dam that you would want to implement in an area because of political reasons. However, the experts know that you have to displace populations. If that issue is not picked and noting the complexities around the social issues that will arise in a project like that, then that becomes a problem. So documentation becomes extremely critical, and also constant communication with the police, so that the political pronouncements that are going to be made would be in tandem in such a manner that you will be able to implement the project seamlessly. Proactiveness on some of these risks becomes extremely clear. And in my view, the politicians and the political field will tend to listen to the experts so long as they have the necessary data and the necessary information to be able to carry it along during the implementation of the project.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much. I come back to you, Mr. Kaggwa. I'm now looking for practical examples within the region, could be from your country or from any other African country that you may know, or literally from anywhere that can set context to what we are discussing. We want to know, examples of where disputes in the infrastructure sector have escalated to litigation, because you're in that space, and give us an idea of what impact it had now on the ground of the project itself when such litigation matters proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kasanga. I'll borrow a quote from your Malcolm, that disputes start wrong. Is that what you said?
Yeah, things don't go wrong. They start wrong.
They start wrong, yes. So one example that started wrong is in Uganda. I have two case studies, one in Uganda, another one is Kenya. The one in Uganda that started wrong is a road which is under construction. It's in central Uganda. It's called the Busega-Mpigi Express Highway. It started in 2020. It was supposed to be 27 kilometers. And the initial price that was tendered for that project was 176 million euro. So in Africa, we usually have similar problems. Project affected persons, delays in compensating them. But the critical cause of the problems on this project, which is still not yet finished, was inadequate designs. So from the onset, the designs were inadequate. So when the contractor came on site to start the construction, as they were seeking for more information, there had to be changes in design, and they were so significant that they actually had to rescope the entire road. Initially, it had planned to have about 7 bridges across swamps. They increased to 13 bridges. They had to change its direction. The project affected persons increased twice. So you realize that most of all these problems started from the beginning. So, well, we were lucky as Uganda that the African Development Bank listened to those problems and increased funding. The project cost is now 424 million euro. So it has increased more than twice. And the period of completion has more than doubled. So that's one of those examples where multiple issues, cost overruns, have affected that project. The other one is cited in the Kenyan High Court. It's a dispute that went to the court. I don't know how it went to the court. Maybe the arbitration clause was faulty, or it was an enforcement matter. SBI International versus Kenya National Highways. It was a dispute basically about a decision that was rendered by a dispute board. It was a FDIC contract where there was a dispute board that rendered a decision, and that decision required that money is paid to the contractor. So in that process, the total exposure was 1.6 billion Kenya shillings plus 3,570,000 US dollars plus interest. All these arose from failure to comply with a simple contractual provision. There is a contractual provision in the FDIC contract which provides that when the dispute board makes a decision, if it's a payment decision, both parties must comply with that decision, notwithstanding any challenges, whether to arbitration or litigation. So in this is one of those cases where had the payment been made as soon as the dispute board made that decision, the interest maybe wouldn't have been payable to that extent. So those are two of the cases that I can come across that can speak about this issue. Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. And I want to encourage our participants, if you're there and you know of a similar answer to the question that I have posed, that are examples of infrastructure disputes that have gone to litigation, put it in the chat, then I can highlight them, or a link even for fellow participants also to follow, because I think these are important for us to draw examples from. that if possible, and as far as we can as engineers and professionals and consultants in such projects, we have to go as far as possible to avoid going into litigation. And maybe Mr. Kaggwa, you can tell me who ultimately really bears the costs of these disputes when they go to litigation.
It's the taxpayer that bears this cost ultimately, because the largest infrastructure financier or employer in Africa or even in the world are governments, and they get money from the citizens. Or in the case of Uganda, the case I've given you, we had to borrow an extra 270 million euro from the African Development Bank. So we're going to pay interest over a longer period of time, but also the citizens, because this is a road in the middle of central Uganda. It has one of the highest traffic. It's that road that connects Uganda to Rwanda and Burundi and Congo. So for the 10 years that it's not complete, with too much dust, with too many accidents due to the trucks on the road, so ultimately it's the citizens that suffer.
Absolutely, and very, very sad. And that is why we are here today, because we want to shift the mindsets of the engineers who are really the contract managers, so that we can begin to see how we can help the taxpayer ultimately and help the project for it to fruition. And so we'll move to our second segment. I can see comments are coming in, and Mary Sheila Onyango is asking us to give the full citation of SBI versus Kenha, a case that she's aware that there's another matter between parties in which court declined to award interest following the decision of the DAB. Please, if anyone can find that citation, we'll be very happy to come back and look into it. So now, this question I'm posing is actually for both of you. And maybe we'll start with, I'll start again with you. We can go with Engineer Cherono. You can take us through some of the ADR mechanisms, which are the main mechanisms, negotiation, mediation, and arbitration, which are mostly within our space, and explain how each is most appropriate, particularly balancing speed, costs, and and fairness. Maybe you can take one and Kaggwa can take the other, or something like that. So let's start with Engineer Cherono.
So thank you very much. David had earlier on gone through quite a few of the dispute resolution mechanisms that are available. And I will take this from a very practical sense, because having been in the field for some times before as an engineer, it's possible to see what was your role as you carried out these dispute resolution mechanisms that are available. The first one being negotiation. Now, when you receive a claim from a contractor or from an employer when you're sitting as the engineer, the first part and the most simple way of resolving it is to try to negotiate. And this is really what the parties do. What, for example, the FIDIC form of contract provides, it does say that when you receive a notice from the contractor of a claim, then the contractor is supposed to submit the details of the claim. And at that point, the engineer plays the role of bringing together the parties to negotiate. So the two parties would sit down and try to agree on a solution on trying to deal with this. And therefore, negotiation becomes a very critical tool for the different participants in the project to be able to deal with that dispute at that point. Now, should that not happen, or should they not agree, then mediation kicks in. And what the engineer would do is to encourage the parties to agree. And when that is not achieved, then he takes the role of the expert determiner. So the parties would empower the engineer to determine on the matter, since he's much more knowledgeable on the issue. And that brings up the issue of expert determination in the contract. Now, when that is not, if the decision of the engineer is not complied upon, then the issue is referred to adjudication. And this is where dispute boards really come in. Of course, I'll speak about, or we'll speak about issues of dispute avoidance later on, but the dispute adjudication board should be able to look at the issue, the dispute between them, and they should be able to come up with a decision. And if they don't comply with that decision, then the matter, and there's a notice of dissatisfaction, then the matter proceeds from the dispute board to arbitration. Now, coming to the question that you asked, which is the most appropriate? If you look at our contracts and you look at the dispute resolution mechanisms that are provided in all those contracts, it appears or it's very apparent that all of these dispute resolution mechanisms are appropriate, depending on the complexity of the issue. Some issues are easily negotiated, some issues are better mediated, then some issues are better dealt by the engineer as an expert. Some issues are better resolved by the dispute boards, and some much more complex issues, of course, which involve huge amounts of money may go to arbitration. But in any case, all these methods are important and they are applicable to resolving the disputes. I want to bring out another angle of disputes that involve other parties who are not necessarily in the contract, because you might be working in an area where you have a community that is agitating, say, for example, for their compensation payments for land. And I have seen the engineer play a very important part. Although the public, the members of public or the owners of this land or the project affected persons may not necessarily be part of being part of the project, we did say that these projects are usually implemented in very complex environments. So mediation in that area becomes very critical, especially when you are dealing with other parties whose actions are likely going to impact on the projects that you do. So in a construction contract, all these dispute resolution mechanisms are extremely important, and it is quite important for the engineer or for the experts who are working on these contracts to make sure that they have the relevant skills to be able to deal with the dispute based on its nature and the complexity as it comes along.
Well, thank you so much for setting that stage. And I hope participants, you're getting to the conversation here being more of requiring the engineer to be literate in disputes and dispute resolution as part and parcel of your day-to-day work. And engineer, I'm calling you an engineer now, Mr. Kaggwa. I want you to come in and speak towards arbitration. Is it, a last resort, the finality of it? And there's also a question there which I want you to deal with as you're speaking. Somebody did ask, this is Teddy. Teddy has asked, what is your opinion with regards to high costs attached to dispute avoidance and adjudication boards? This is particularly due to there being limited pool of qualified neutrals and experts, especially those with the necessary language skills and local expertise, leading to reliance on international experts. You speak towards all those things being tied together. The move from DABs to arbitration, is arbitration the utmost final, and then the role of these DABs.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll start with the DABs with a question in the chat. What's your opinion in regards to high costs attached to dispute boards? To put it in context, it's like asking, why is it expensive to pay for insurance premium? Because dispute boards is like an insurance premium. The amount of money that you would incur if an accident happens is extremely high compared to the premium that you would pay to get an insurance policy. So basically, dispute boards, most especially the standing boards, which are established at the commencement of the project, play a very critical role in the avoidance of disputes. So a dispute which would otherwise have cost you millions of dollars is avoided. So do not look at the cost as the money that you pay to the DAB member or the money you pay in travel. It is extremely insignificant compared to the costs like I've already detailed to you. If at all we had an effective dispute board for the Segambiji, maybe there would have been a less amount of money that we are going to pay at the end of the day, because some of these things like scoping or designs, if they have been seen from the onset, it's possible that maybe we would not have been in the situation in which we are in. So they're not expensive. In fact, research has been conducted by the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation, and the cost of a dispute board is insignificant. It's almost 0.1 to 0.3% of the project. So it's not very significant. And then this is partially due to there being a limited pool of qualified, neutral experts, particularly those with necessary language skills and local experience, leading to reliance on international experts. Well, we are doing our best. First of all, even this symposium, it is intended to provide awareness, but also to grow capacity. We are doing our best. We have members that are on the President's Feeding list. One of our participants is on that list, Engineer Cyrus Oyom from Uganda. We have members in Kenya who are on that list. FCIArb Kenya maintains a register of neutrals that do adjudications. The professionals are there. So I need to tell you that the professionals are there, and we just need to grow our numbers. Now, regarding arbitration, arbitration has been said, and it has been confirmed by many courts, even in Africa, that it's a final method for dispute resolution, right from after a DAB decision. And it's premised on a simple principle that if you choose arbitration as your method of dispute resolution, and you also make a choice of the decision maker, either by written letter or by delegating the power of appointment. I'm aware that the chairman of FCIArb Kenya makes appointments using delegated powers from the parties. So if you've made a choice of who your arbitrator is, and you've made a choice of the process, you must be bound, finally, by that decision. So that's the finality of arbitration. So even when there are errors in maybe the reasoning or the quantification, you're bound by that decision. So it is like a marriage, for better or for worse. So, of course, the exceptional circumstances where awards have been set aside, where there's been fraud or where there's been issues of decisions that are contrary to the law, those are there and they are few, but at least FCIArb has made an effort to train its arbitrators and neutrals to make sure that the awards are not set aside and they're enforced. Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaggwa, for that.
Let me weigh a bit on.
You want to pitch in?
Yes, just let me pitch in a
Go
bit.
ahead.
And I think that is a very important point that they raised regarding the cost of dispute adjudication boards, the DABs, especially dispute avoidance adjudication boards. I must say that disputes are not cheap. And when they come, they are really, really expensive on the parties. And the two examples that have been highlighted by my fellow panelists clearly demonstrates what I've just raised about. He talked about insurance, and perhaps maybe a question to throw back to the participant is how much do you think that we should pay the dispute board? Because they come as good as the quality of what you get. I know among our panelists, we have some very experienced adjudicators who over the time have been able to spend a lot of time to deal with the disputes that the parties create. Now, if you look at the issue of DAABs, it may look on the surface that you are paying a lot of money. But what is the cost of the disputes that they have helped you to avoid during the course of that project? And look at the success rate of the projects that really have these DAABs. So this sensitization should actually bring forth the reason that all projects should have some way of trying to mainstream dispute avoidance and dealing with those disputes in good time. Remember when I did my opening remarks, I mentioned about the issue that the main cause of this is the fact that we are not resolving disputes effectively, sensibly, and economically. So ultimately, what you see at the end of the day are disputes which are poorly managed because we never entrained the culture and the process during the implementation of that project. So I just wanted to pitch in at that point. And I saw another comment from one of the participants, and now allow me to weigh on this, on the issue of pay now, argue later. Remember, one of the advantages of ADR and choosing the way you would want your disputes to be resolved in the course of your project is the party autonomy. The parties decide how they would want their dispute to be resolved from the onset, in a very cheap way, in a speedy manner, and in a way that nobody outside the scope of projects would know. So the issues of confidentiality come in a much more flexible way, and in a way that it increases the compliance, and also in a manner that increases the satisfaction among the parties. Now, the principle of pay now, argue later means that once the issue is taken before a DB, the decision of the DB becomes binding, because you are trying as much as possible to return the offended party to the position that they were in prior to the occurrence of the incident that resulted into the dispute. So it is a good principle. Remember that even DB decisions which have further been taken to arbitration have actually received very results coming out of arbitration. Now, in a normal project, say a project that you are working on now, if a contractor is losing money and you don't pay them at that instance, then what does it mean to the success of that project? So I wanted to pitch in at that.
Thank you so much, Engineer. Thank you for that pitching in, and a shout out to Martin. He has given a shout out to yourself as a former classmate, so that's wonderful. And thank you for that. And just also to emphasize on the issue of DBs, I think you heard the chairman when he was introducing that, I have a project where I'm trying to encourage a lot of architects also to scale up on dispute resolution. So the call is out there that we must upskill, capacity build as dispute resolvers, so that we can enter into these spaces and really claim what is technically our space. I'm coming back to you, Engineer, because this was a question that I had structured for you. And I want you to wear your project management cap and tell me what considerations should guide the selection and embedding of a dispute resolution mechanism at a different stage of a project. Of course, infrastructure projects, with every stage as it goes, there are some critical milestones or critical steps that go into it. If we are trying to embed ADR into the process, what are the considerations in selecting the mechanism to use?
You may recall from my previous response, I did say that most of the dispute resolution mechanisms that are embedded currently in our contract encompasses all the available dispute resolution, because it encourages those mechanisms from the simplest to the most complex. However, you may also note from your contracts that you are implementing now, we are not paying a lot of attention on what dispute resolution mechanism is actually on that contract. I want to give our participants a very simple task. At the end of this webinar or during the course of this webinar, please open any page within your contract documents where you have the dispute resolution clause. I have done this in some training, and you'll be very surprised that many of our participants have never paid attention on that clause. I once executed a contract where we were supposed to, get to carry out our mediation from the ICC in a very simple contract, because it was more or less a cut and paste issue from coming out from another project. However, keeping to the question, what consideration should you take? Look at the complexity of the project. Look at the parties. If you are implementing, for example, a project between parties within this jurisdiction, say within the country, within Kenya or within Uganda, why would you want to go for an international arbitration? Do we read these clauses properly? So have a look at the parties who are involved in the contract. The other thing that you also must look at is also the complexity of the project. I have seen, for example, clauses in very simple projects like construction of apartments, where somebody talks about, should a dispute arise, we need a panel of 3 arbitrators of this caliber, of this quality, of this kind of experience. And those issues have eventually brought a lot of problems to the parties whenever a dispute arises, because you are not able to pay or to afford the fees that go into resolving that dispute. So pay a lot of attention on that. Of course, if you are dealing with arbitration, look at the seat where you are going to have the rules, what you are going to do. And in many cases, and as much as possible, try to consult your legal counsels, and people knowledgeable and experienced in matters of dispute resolution as you go along. But I would also encourage a multi-tiered form of dispute resolution, where you start from negotiation. Perhaps you might think about mediation, you think about adjudication, because it helps to narrow out the issues, and eventually most of those issues do not go to the much more expensive forms of dispute resolution.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, thank you for that. We are going to shift a little bit into a conversation about practical steps in how to embed ADR into project management. And although this question is for the two of you, I want to start with Mr. Kaggwa. And we want to look at the role that management and project staff, those working within the project, play in promoting the culture of ADR. And if you can share any examples where ADR has helped preserve working relationships with contractors and stakeholders, because part of the essence of ADR is to preserve relationships. And I think for all of us here who are consultants within that space, you know how painful it is when the two parties in a contract can no longer see eye to eye. Nobody ever wants that situation. So, Mr. Kaggwa?
Yeah, I think the first aspect that must be introduced at management level is the duty to cooperate with one another. For a long time, it was a concept of good manners. It wasn't contractual. But of recent, it has actually been included in the latest PD conditions of contract, where there is a requirement to give early warning notices. It's one of the concepts of good cooperation. You're not really telling the other party that you have a claim or that actually you're going to ask money from them, but you're simply giving them notice that at a future time, there might be an issue, such that then parties can sit together and have a discussion. So I think it's a very important aspect at management level that all contract participants, as a key performance indicator, engage in cooperation among themselves, such that all issues that would otherwise have arisen are prevented. The other one, of course, is having maintaining a register of claims or risk aspects. When you have records that are easily accessible by all the contract participants, it can be a management KPI that as and when a claim arises, it is easier for a decision maker who was not on site, even if it is an ad hoc dispute board, once they review your contemporaneous records and they realize that these records show a true reflection of what has happened during the project site, it can actually go a long way in resolving or even avoiding a dispute. I would request Engineer Cherono to come in, since that's his day-to-day work.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, disputes are created by us in this room. All participants, when you're working as an engineer, working for a contractor, working for an employer, and working for the engineer, for the engineer. Perhaps how to promote this practice is starts from the discussions that we've had this afternoon. Let us train, let us sensitize. Engineers are very good at designing culverts. They are designing bridges, designing pavements, alignments, and all that. But they tend to shy away from, looking at these dispute resolution mechanisms that are inbuilt into their contracts. Let us train our staff, from the people, all the participants who are handling the designs. Let them know that whatever they do may eventually have an impact on what is being implemented on the ground. The second thing that we must also think about is the discussions. I have attended several site meetings, and what features mostly is the progress of works and time. In fact, everybody can recite by heart what is the progress of this project and how much time has elapsed. But rarely do we delve on the problems that are in the project. We need to confront some of these issues during site meetings. And it also encourages good culture where the two parties can speak. When the contractor sits across you see, he's the one who makes the payments. He feels the pinch of the money because any loss that goes directly to him. We need to mainstream the issue of disputes and any claims that may be pertinent in the project during these site meetings and encourage discussions around them. And it helps, as I said earlier on, to narrow down on these issues and to see what can be resolved and what can be escalated at that point. Now, when disputes become difficult, let us have a culture of ensuring that we have timely escalation of those disputes. There's a reason as to why in all our conditions of contracts, there are timelines. There's a timelines to when you give a notice. There's a timelines on when you must submit a claim. There's a timeline in which you must evaluate that claim, and a decision has to be reached at some point. The longer the claim or the dispute stays, the more difficult it gets. I did talk about it snowballing into a big problem that raises problems. And if you may take note, even those people, those of our colleagues who are dealing with those disputes at present were not present during the occurrence of that issue. And David did talk about the current records that we are talking about, the contemporary records that we must have. Yes, he talked about them, and there is actually need to continuously keep record and of all the happenings that happen around the disputes and all agreements that have been arrived at. Because you would go to a meeting, agreements are reached, but they are never recorded in any form. So this is a way of exploring. It is a way that actually the management staff and those working in projects can explore to make sure that that culture is inbuilt. At the beginning of the project, I also do encourage that as much as we develop, for example, the quality management manual for the project, the quality assurance manual, which we do develop for our projects, it would be very important to have a well-defined way of managing these disputes as they arise during the contract as part of the quality assurance manual, which is kept during that. And if engineers can actually design those very complex structures, they should be able, in a very simple way, to deal with many issues and these disputes as they arise or on site. Allow me, moderator, to weigh in on some issue. And I think I've seen termination on the chat twice. And I just wanted to focus my mind on contracts where one of the parties terminates a contract when a dispute is still alive. Termination is actually a symptom that issues in the contract were not properly managed, and one of the parties did not meet an important obligation that the other party feels that they just have to walk away from the contract. Projects are high pressure, and if you don't deal with those issues, eventually something has to give. And when it gives, you find a party has moved away and they have ended up terminating that contract. As to how you resolve those disputes before you terminate, points down to how you will prepare your clauses and the way you would want to resolve those issues during the life of the contract. Let us think about at the beginning that it is possible that this contract will be terminated, and put the proper mechanism to tell you what you would do in case a problem arises and it actually leads to termination. Because the termination is the worst, the most adverse, action which is taken by a party, just to quit the contract. And at that point, it means relationships are broken, and it means now that it is very difficult to restore relationships up to the end. The intention of dispute resolution mechanisms that have been put in our contracts is at the end of the dispute, and once it is resolved, the relationship
some salient points that have come out from both our panelists here today. I like the idea of a register of claims and risk aspect. Actually, that is one thing I don't know how many people actually do that. And I wanted to just pose back a question to Engineer Cherono, because you're the one on the ground. You're the one who's been doing these projects for a long time. Earlier, you had said that as consultants, actually, we are a big problem when it comes to matters of dispute. And like Mr. Kaggwa has told us in Uganda, that first case that he cited in Uganda, that there was a question of inadequate design. And that becomes a big problem already from the onset, from the beginning of the project. Somebody needs to mute. Sorry, somebody needs to mute. Please help mute that person. Now, I'm wondering from the KENHA point of view, to mitigate some of these things. I know we've talked about, yes, consultants must skill up on ADR matters, but what other mechanisms can an institution, can an organization institutionalize ADR, besides putting the ADR mechanisms in contract? And probably this conversation we are having now from a KENHA point of view, how else do you reduce the risk of disputes? How do you manage the parties from the onset so that you can reduce the outcome or there being disputes as we go along, sort of to manage relationships from the word go?
Yeah, I will start from when you have not come into you have not come into a contract. You've not signed your contract. Before you release a document for tender, ensure that the documents forming the contract are very clear and well drafted. I want to say this because contract documents are not just the bill of quantities and a few conditions of contract. If you look at our standard forms of contract, they will contain the contract agreement, which should not be ambiguous in any way. You will have the letter of acceptance. You will have the letter of tender. You will have the particular conditions. You have the general conditions. You have the specifications. You have the drawings that would form that tender. You have the schedules, the different schedules, including the bill of quantities that you do, and all other documents, including the the minutes of the site meetings that you did attend. Ensure that these documents speak to themselves. I did also say, before you sign the contract, please seek independent legal advice, either from somebody, from a legal counsel, or somebody knowledgeable with standard forms of contract. And for bespoke contracts, those contracts which are tailor-made, ensure that you have a legal expert to regularly review, so that you are not copying, cut and paste these documents as you move along. And you also make sure that it is suitable for the purpose of the project that you are designing. Now, during the implementation, please hold regular meetings and to keep track of the discussions, decisions, and agreements, so that it will provide an audit trail should you want to refer some of these issues to an independent third party who is addressing your dispute. Keep up-to-date contemporary records, the way we did say, and you also set out very clear payment terms in your contract. Because I did say from the onset that the disputes arise because of two key critical issues. One, somebody is delayed. So long as there is a delay, there is money involved, because these projects are usually expensive, and any day that is delayed, then that becomes the case. Ensure also that all your key personnel, the project personnel, understand the terms of the contract and know how to avoid disputes. Because sometimes you say in a building contract, you have the clerk of works instructing works that are contrary to what the architect expected the contractor to be able to execute on site. If they are not very keen on what would be the impact of the instructions to the contractor at that point, then potentially you are looking at a dispute. Please ensure also a multi-tiered dispute resolution mechanism, which spans what I did raise earlier, the issues of negotiation, mediation, adjudication, the DBs, prior to thinking even about resolving to go to litigation at the end. Early resolution of disputes becomes extremely important, because that is what saves time, it saves money, and it ensures the success of our project.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for that documentation, communication, early warning systems. Then I have to be set in place from an early stage, and frameworks of how to deal with issues as they arise. Thank you so much for that, engineer. Let me come back to Mr. Kaggwa. Earlier on, engineer had, set a context of some of the challenges that infrastructure projects may come across from the word go. And he did mention something to do with attitude of the parties. Tell me, Mr. Kaggwa, how should project teams deal with difficult or resistant stakeholders while keeping disputes from escalating?
Tough. The first question is,
Yes.
who are the first question is, who are the stakeholders? I would want to look at the donor, for example, of course, the employers, and I want to just give you a practical. One of the ways of dealing with stakeholders is through constant engagement. There is things every 3 months. Ordinarily,